Let else in Rust is something as almost good as I want it to be. It does get me one step closer to that brevity that I'm looking for and the ability to capture data from destructuring in options, structures, enumerations, and results. Here's where it's broken. The part that I don't like is the divergence. Now that sounds, hold on, what's going on here? All right, so let's look at let else, which not to be confused with if let. Right? If let is a whole other thing. It's very close to the same thing, but it does it a little bit differently. We'll need to look over those differences. But first, let else, a refutable pattern that can match and bind variables in the surrounding scope. See, that's where it's different. This is the big difference between let else and if let. So with if let, you can only capture data. So if we look at the screen here in this code, if let some number, right? We're going to grab this number 7 from this option called sum, and then we'll get a variable that's populated with 7, and then we can use it inside that scope. You can't use it outside that scope, right? That won't work here. We'll get a compile error if we try to print outside the scope of this if statement. This will fail. This right here will fail. We'll have a problem. But what if you did want that variable outside this scope? You can use let else. Almost. You can almost do it. It requires a divergence section. Okay, so there is a deep block of code here. It's just a lot. It's a little overwhelming, so I simplified it a bit because I think this is a little bit easier to read. All right, so this is the let else pattern. Pretty straightforward, right? Let sum, it looks the same here, equals number. Where it's different is the else, and you have to have a divergence. It has to exit the scope if it fails, and that's what I don't like. I don't like that. I want to be able to pass back a default variable of some sort, like 0, for example. If I get a number, great. If I don't, then I want to return 0. Like I want to get some data to proceed onward. I don't want to have to escape. There's no option around this other than to have to escape. You could create more structured around this in a way that requires more effort to do this kind of thing. Actually, we could use let else. Could we? Wait. No, I think we have to do something like this. So since the let else mandates a divergence, right, a break or an escape right here, it's mandatory. You can't get away with it. You can also panic, which I would say is even worse. You don't want to do that. We don't like, for example, they want you to panic. Like this is just the example that they provide. It's like panic. Your program needs to continue onward. We have to keep going. So what I like better, I want to be able to capture the data and provide a default. And so you can do it like this, but this is kind of gross looking. Right? Loop, wait, what's going on here? Let else and just this extra scaffolding. So in that case, like the better pattern with a default would be a match. It's better to use a match in this case, right? Because now I can see what's going on. I'm defining my variable and I get to use it in the outer scope, right? For example, with the if let, you can't use it in the outer scope. It's only available inside. So this might work better in that case. Like this is more my preferred pattern. However, if you can tolerate a divergence, this is actually pretty clean right here. I like this because it's pretty straightforward. You just have to say exit the scope and now you can print the data. So there we go. We've got our let else. It will let you define some pretty concise code. I like this. This is actually really clean, but it mandates a divergence. Oh, if only I could just do this, right? If I could just do that, that would be nice. But nope, sorry, you have to diverge. Because it's nice, it's a single line. I like, this is so good. But instead, this is something, I guess we could put this on a single line. I suppose that would work. But there's a lot of symbols going on here, right? We need these rocket assignments, it's the braces. Well, I guess you got the curly braces here too. But it's less code, like this would be cleaner. Either way, we've got nice options at our fingertips to be able to capture the data that's being passed around. So it's good. It's good to know this one. We have 3 lines of code on the screen. They all do the same thing. Or do they? They might or they might not. Or they could be almost the same thing, but one of them does something a little different. And there's no other option that's available to us. We're looking at let else. We see let else. All right, so we've got some patterns here in Rust. So our first pattern is let else. Second pattern is our match. And our third pattern is our if let. I like concise, clean code, the minimal code, easy to read, but not that much on the screen. Few syntaxes is, minimal. which achieves the most. And so for that reason, I like this line here, the let else. It's my favorite. However, there's one major drawback that is inescapable, and Rust won't let you do anything about it. Your else mandates an escape, a divergence, a breaking. You have to exit the current scope in order for your application to proceed onward if the number does not match your requirements for defining your variable. Whereas we compose these other two options down here, the match and the if let, offer us the ability to supply a default value, which I like better because your program needs to continue onward the best it possibly can. Under most conditions, you're accepting user input, and that user input is going to be submitted through an API, and you need to be able to, validate and sanitize that data, but also there's a lot of optional fields. So you need a default, and the default might be an empty string or a 0. For example, I would love to be able to do this, but Rust won't let you. You're like, nope, sorry. Here's the error. Else clause of let else does not diverge. Divergence is mandatory. And then it gives you something, expected explanation point. Expected type, exclamation point, found integer. Try adding diverging expressions, such as return or panic. Or you could use the match and let else. Oh, instead of let else. I got excited there. I was like, oh, there's another thing. Nope, just kidding. Use match. Yeah, and see, that's what I'm looking at here. So we are required by law, the Rust compiler law, to diverge under a scenario where it does not match. Now, this can be totally fine if you have it tucked inside of a function somewhere, and you could return a default value here, and then you could return I. This is annoying, right? It's if you want that pattern, you could instead return here, and now it's on one line, or you could return here. Can you return here? I actually think you can return here. I wonder if that works. Okay. Let's test it really quick. Okay, so this pattern does work if you've got it inside of a function here, and you can return if let sum, else 0. So you've got a nice pattern that's clean. It works all in one line. It's minimal syntax. I like this. Okay, this is actually a pretty cool pattern. I like this pattern here. You could also, you don't even have to say return. You could just do that. Now it's a little more confusing. I mean, I would say that's a lot more confusing. This should work. No, it doesn't. Okay. Oh wait. Return. Let's make it explicit. It wants a semicolon. Oh, wait. Here we go. Let's go back. Okay. That should work. I figured that should work. Okay. That is not at all confusing, by the way, but it works. You would not expect this to do it. I mean, it seems like it's fine syntax, but you wouldn't expect it to actually return the number. What does this function do? Well, it returns whatever value is inside this. So I suppose what you'd want to do is make that into a function that does this. You could test. So I think we do number. There we go. So now that should say match 7 because our number in the scope is 7. All right, we had to add a type there to our function, so it knows what the variable is going to be because it's a typed language. We can say this will be like essentially our default unwrap, and then we can do something like that. Default unwrap. Off we go. Okay, but it works. Like this is line 46 right here. This is you wouldn't think that would actually do what it does. Because there's no ending semicolon, which means it's going to return whatever value is left to the upper scope, or the call stack. And you wouldn't think that this would return data, but it does. If you don't want to create a whole other function just for this pattern, I mean, another good approach would just be to use a match statement, right? You could say let I equals, and you could use a match statement like that. You could also just do it here, right? Yes, okay. So these two options work for capturing that data. They're exactly the same. Well, in terms of meaning, I suppose, I don't know, which one's your favorite? I can't tell which one's my favorite. So we've got the let else pattern, which mandates a returning of data through divergence, mandatory. You've got to diverge. No option around that. You could tuck this into a function, for example, if you wanted. We've got the match statement, which is clean, so you understand, okay, so I've got an option and it's under the case where there's no data. So you can do that. You can also add in more variants if you wanted, so this is more flexible in the future. And this is an either or situation. So when you know that you want to just grab the data or have a default, this is probably better. If you know in the future that you're going to want some variations on that based on some ranges and things like that, you could use the matching pattern. Pretty neat. You've got some pretty good syntax options. So avoid the let else unless you're sure that you can escape the scope And you can do something crazy, like you can put it in a loop. if you really wanted to use that syntax, you could do something like this. It's not worth it. It's better to use a match statement or an if-let statement. Well, a let if-let. Let if-let.